Before Money in the Bank, we had WWE opening the weekend last night with NXT Takeover Chicago 2 from the All-State Arena. And as is typically the case, even though Money in the Bank has not taken place yet, it's got a very uphill battle ahead of it, coming off what was another excellent TakeOver show. I sound like a broken record saying that, but that has been the pattern with these NXT shows. They are consistently excellent. Maybe a few hiccups here and there, but by and large, these are very enjoyable shows, some of the best shows all year. And I didn't have a chance to do predictions on the podcast last week. I was hoping maybe the show might go up early this weekend. I would do them. I didn't have a chance to. But I did participate in the Wrestle Rumble predictions that they have over at WrestleRumble.com. Matt does a tremendous job with that. I would definitely check that out, by the way, for all of the WWE pay-per-views over at Wrestle Rumble. I did submit my predictions to him as far as who I thought would win, and just looking back now at the email, I got every single match right. As predictable as it was, though, it was, I think, the right outcomes for all of the matches. I mean, I went pretty much with the outcomes that I thought would make the most sense. And wouldn't you know it, Triple H and the other powers that be over at NXT clearly felt the same way. And that really is, in a lot of ways, I think, the story of NXT. They tell very simple stories that make sense, that progress in a logical way, play itself out over a period of time. We have in Ciampa and Gargano one of the great WWE rivalries, I think, of the last decade plus. The way this thing has been built up, the matches that the two of them have had, the personal nature of the feud. We don't really have a chance, I don't think, at least not on the main roster, to see this type of feud play out this way. So it's very old school, kind of a throwback in a lot of ways. And even the crowd, the crowd is, doing what you would expect and hope for them to do. They boo the hell out of Ciampa and they cheer the hell out of Gargano, because Johnny Gargano is one of the best baby faces in all of wrestling, and Tommaso Ciampa is one of the best heels. So when you give the people what they want and you give the people a simple story, characters that they can like, characters that they can dislike, it plays out in a wonderful way. I don't think they could have opened with a better match than the Tag Team Championship match. It was the Undisputed Era. Kyle O'Reilly and Roderick Strong defending against Oney Lorcan and Danny Burch. I thought maybe they would open with Ricochet and Velveteen Dream, but looking back on this was a match that kind of started slow. It built and it built and it built, and for whatever reason, the crowd was all in on the Undisputed Era, and they were booing, or a segment of the crowd anyway, took to booing Lorcan and Burch, which we have not seen before. They're kind of the scrappy underdog team, at least at Full Sail. They're always very popular. But there were a lot of boos, and not because I think people hated them. They certainly gave them a standing ovation and showed them a lot of respect when the match was over. But the Undisputed Era was just that popular. And I thought, wait a minute, is Adam Cole from Chicago? I thought he was from Pennsylvania, and he is. Maybe I'm just missing the connection here. Maybe, the group is just that over. But I thought maybe one of them was from Chicago. There had to be some kind of explanation for why the crowd was just so totally into the heel faction here in this match. But it made for a great atmosphere. As the match progressed, the crowd got more and more into it, and just brutal stuff. I mean, you kind of expect that when you see Oney Lorcan. A lot of his matches, people end up with bloody nose, bloody mouth. Danny Burch also kind of cut from the same cloth. He's this kind of UK brawler type. We know what Kyle O'Reilly can do. We know what Roderick Strong can do. Roddy is somebody who scares me. I would not want to be in the ring with him, taking knife edge chops and some of those suplexes and backcrackers. His stuff, you could say what you want to about the guy's personality and all that, and people have, but his stuff in the ring is as crisp and as stiff and as real as anybody in the company today. And that's, I think, a big part of what you want to look for in somebody is that believability. And Roddy has that in spades. But you put these four together and it turned into an excellent match. One of the scariest things I've ever seen was a spot later in the match where Oney Lorcan goes up to the top rope. And I believe it was the first time they were setting up for their Doomsday Device finish, which is not what they call it, but they were setting up for it. And I want to say it was Kyle O'Reilly shoved Oney Lorcan off the top rope. He caught him before he could hit the move, and he shoved him off the top rope. And this was not a normal shove where Oney would kind of just tumble to the outside, or maybe he would even fall into the ring. He did a flip dive out onto the apron. He landed back first, splatted on the apron, and then sort of rolled off to the floor. And in case you didn't know, I don't know how you wouldn't, because they told you this 7,000 times during the pay-per-view, or during the event. I still call them pay-per-views. They told you all night long that the apron is the hardest part of the ring. I think we're all well aware of that by now. But it was a brutal-looking spot. I mean, he looked like he was killed dead on that spot. We didn't see him for a few minutes after that, but that was very scary. That was a very scary bump where any number of things could go wrong. And really, we saw on this show a lot of moves on the apron. And it kind of reminded me, there was a period of time in Ring of Honor where there were people doing moves and pile drivers on the apron and moves on the apron. And all of a sudden on WWE television, like the very next night and the very next week, the Uso, like all these different wrestlers are doing moves out on the apron. Cesaro and people, and believe me, that was no coincidence. But this was a show where we saw a lot of moves throughout the entire night, really, on the apron. And it is, in fact, the hardest part of the ring, in case you did not know that. But this is where things really started to pick up in the match. Lorcan, who somehow was able to recover, he did so, and not only did he recover, but this crazy bastard went and he hit a double blockbuster. He dove off the apron, hit a double blockbuster on the floor to Undisputed Era. They then hit the Doomsday Device maneuver. They did mention the name. They have a name for it. I did not write it down. I was so immersed in the match, I wasn't really interested in sitting there taking notes like a bookworm. So I don't recall the name of it. But they hit the move. Adam Cole at this point interfered to break up the surefire pinfall. That's when he got tossed. Fans were not happy about that. Cool sequence came towards the end when the babyfaces had the heels in simultaneous submissions. And Kyle O'Reilly, I believe, I want to say it was a half crab that he was locked in. So you got to picture this. Stereo submissions are going on in the ring. And they really did a good job of making you think there was going to be a title change, at least for a split second. At least I started to buy into it. And Kyle O'Reilly kind of reverses out of the move and picks his boot up and just starts booting. I want to say it was Lorcan who had the other submission on. He starts kicking him in the face to break that submission up. It's a very unique thing. I don't know that I've ever seen that in a WWE tag team match before. But it was the double running knees. It was the high-low that Undisputed Era was able to connect with. And they were able to score the pinfall to retain the tag team titles. Just like I said, chaos in the final waning moments of the match. That's where, really, I thought that last few minutes is what put this thing over the top here. This was as excellent an opener as you could possibly have, and it did not hurt things that the Undisputed Era was over like a main event act. They really were. They came across for the first time, I think, in this entire stretch that they've had in NXT. And tonight they were in like a full-size building. I mean, Money in the Bank is going to be in the same building tonight. And these guys, you could put them on the main roster tomorrow. And I feel like in due time they would get over as a headline act on either Raw or SmackDown. They were that popular. And if they can carry that to other places and sort of grow that, I think they're going to do very well for themselves when and if they call that act up to the main roster. And Adam Cole is going to do very well for himself no matter what. Adam Cole just has something, he's got that intangible element to him that he'll do very well for himself. And I think he could do very well not only either as a heel or a babyface. I feel like either way, there's a big future in store for Adam Cole. And just a great match. So then we get to the match I was looking forward to most this whole weekend, not just for TakeOver, but really the entire weekend, including Money in the Bank, which was Ricochet against the Velveteen Dream. I love that video package they put together. I thought that was very well done. They showed that on TV last week. Velveteen Dream comes out, and he is dressed like Hulk Hogan. And not in like a comedic way like when Big Show came out all those years ago at Backlash, dressed up as the Showster dude with the mustache and everything else. His getup, Velveteen Dream had a bandana, and he had the old Hogan shirt with the holes, kind of the rips in the back of it, And even when he got into the ring, he ripped the shirt off. He was cupping his ear. People were going nuts for this. People were going absolutely nuts for this. I saw some people online saying, oh, he's wearing tights like Prince Puma. He's mocking Prince Puma. I know he was using the Prince Puma image as his avatar on Twitter, so I guess it's possible that that's what he was going for. But I just looked at the red and yellow and everything and thought that the whole thing was just a takeoff on Hogan. I wasn't thinking Prince Puma at all, although you may be right. So that was kind of unexpected that he would come out, or they would even okay that, because I know the whole Hogan thing is still a very sensitive subject, but I thought that was very unique. And again, Velveteen Dream, I mentioned a moment ago, the Undisputed Era, over like Rover in Chicago, so is the Velveteen Dream. Everywhere this guy goes, people are into him. He comes out like a rock star. Kid's only 22 years old. He's only going to get better from here. It's kind of scary. Ricochet comes out, taking nothing away from him. People go nuts for him too. And so they went on to have what was an excellent match. Velveteen Dream is building quite the resume for himself very early on here in his career. Ricochet has kind of set the bar so high with what he can do in the ring that it would be very difficult, I think, for him to go in there and not have a very good match. Although you could argue the bar is so high with Ricochet that, can he live up to the hype? Look at all the hype that Ricochet had for all those years before he even set foot in WWE. He kind of has this high standard in many people's eyes that he set for himself. He's got to live up to. And so far, so good. So far, so this was first big singles match at a TakeOver show. He debuted last time as part of this multi-man ladder match and arguably stole the show in that one as well. But this was really his first big singles match since coming to NXT. And I thought both these guys knocked it out of the park. The one thing I will say about Velveteen Dream, as much as I like the guy and I think he's only going to get better, there are moments, and I saw this in the Aleister Black match, less so there, more so here, where he is very, I don't know if the word is methodical or if the word maybe is tentative. Tentative might be a better word for it, where he is kind of slowing down some of the moves, whether he's going to throw a clothesline and the guy's going to duck, or he kind of slows things down a little bit at times, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, I'm not sitting here saying that he needs to, be going 80 miles an hour. I mean, he's no Ricochet. Ricochet can get away with that. This guy's still learning, he doesn't have, that many matches in NXT under his belt, but that is something I noticed in this match. And it could just be the fact, frankly, that Ricochet is in a position where he's got to slow it down for some of these guys. I mean, we've seen him, and I know at like PWG shows and other independent shows, he could go in there and go 150 miles an hour. But people, most wrestlers, I'm going to say, and a lot of the newer guys and the younger guys in NXT, they can't keep up with a pace like that. So Ricochet, the challenge for him is he's got to go in there and not, frankly, he's got to go in there and not be as good as he normally is. He's got to slow things down. They tell a story where he's taking a beating or he's selling a body part. So you can't just go, 50 miles a minute. I think for him, that's the challenge. But these two they had a great match. They had some chain wrestling at the beginning of the match. People went, nuts for that. So the story here basically was this. We heard it in the promo on NXT a few weeks ago. Everything you can do, I can do better. Right? So the whole story of this match was Velveteen Dream would pull off a big move or a high spot after Ricochet would, because he was trying to outshine Ricochet. He was out to prove that, hey, everybody talks about what a great high flyer this guy is. Well, I don't know what the big deal is. I can do the same exact thing, but do it better. He was trying to outdo Ricochet. And in the end, it came back to bite him on the ass, because towards the end of the match, we had Ricochet up on the top row, Velveteen Dream was down, and Ricochet was setting up for the 630. And Dream knew it was coming, so he decided to very slowly roll to the center of the ring. Ricochet went to climb down. He stopped and said, you know what? I don't need to climb down. Now, I thought he was going to go for the 630 from all the way across the ring. I didn't know how he was going to pull that off. But instead, he went for a shooting star press. Unlike Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania all those years ago, he almost stuck the move perfectly, but Velveteen Dream got his knees up, which made for a great near fall where you kind of thought Dream might pull it out. Part of me was hoping he would, frankly, because the idea that I pitched a couple of weeks ago was we still have yet to have Velveteen Dream pick up a big win. He's had a couple of impressive matches, but he has yet to win that one big match. So he's kind of in need of a big win. And figuring that Aleister Black was still going to be champion going into TakeOver in Brooklyn, wouldn't it be something to revisit almost a year later the Aleister Black Velveteen Dream program, but this time you have Dream defending the championship, or rather Black defending the championship against Dream after Dream gets a big win over Ricochet. So they could have gone in that direction. They didn't do that, and so now I really don't see Velveteen Dream getting a championship match at SummerSlam weekend. He's done nothing to earn that. But going back here a little bit, Ricochet, he went for Velveteen Dream's finisher, which is the Purple Rainmaker elbow drop. So he actually mimicked Dream's finisher, got a near fall out of it. So to go back to what I was saying, after that is when Ricochet went up and he ended up hitting a shooting star press, and Velveteen Dream put the knees up, buried them in the midsection, and then he got a near fall out of it. Ricochet kicked out. So now Velveteen Dream is going to go up to the top rope. Now, Ricochet is on the other side of the ring. He is in the corner on the other side of the ring. So you think it's, all right, going to go for a coast-to-coast, perhaps. We've seen this move before. Instead, Velveteen Dream climbs up to the top rope and does his little pose. And he launches his body all the way across the ring with a giant elbow drop. And Ricochet moves out of the way, and Velveteen Dream crashes and burns. It looked great. He got the distance on it, but like I said, he did not hit the move. He crashed and burned, and that allowed Ricochet the chance to go up top, hit the 630, and get the pin. So I thought this turned into an excellent match. I would not mind seeing an encore between these two guys. Velveteen Dream is in need. He's going to have to win a big match at some point soon. He can't just keep having matches like this where he just loses and loses. It's only really his second major loss. So it's not that big of a deal. But it does get me thinking about TakeOver and, what that main event is going to be. If it's Aleister Black defending the championship. And I mean, we'll move along here in this review. My thought coming out of the show, frankly, was Ciampa, which I think would, you can go a lot of different ways with that one. But this was great. I thought this match lived up to expectations. Great stuff. We then had the NXT Women's Championship on the line. Shayna Baszler defending against Nikki Cross. For me, this was a come-down match. I didn't think it was a bad match, but I kind of thought it was just sort of there. And I don't know if that was, again, just coming down from the high of the opening two matches that were so great and had the crowd so amped up and on their feet for it. This one, there was something going on in the crowd, and anybody who was there, could speak to this better than I could. I don't know if they kicked somebody out, if there was a fight. So it sucks for the two women because, for a good chunk of the match in the middle there, it didn't seem like they were paying attention at all to what was going on, which kind of mimics what I was doing. I don't know, I just couldn't really ever get into the match fully the way that I had kind of hoped I would, because I thought Nikki Cross and Shayna Baszler was kind of an interesting matchup. Nikki Cross, we're getting to see her for the first time to get to branch out on her own. She's basically positioned as the kind of the psycho babyface, which is a different role for her lately. I thought the match was good, but I wouldn't rank it anywhere above that. The finish was Shayna got the choke, the rear naked choke locked in on Nikki Cross. Nikki Cross was acting, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs throughout the entire match. She was laughing. She was telling Shayna to come after her. She was crawling on all fours like a dog, acting generally insane. And she even had a smile on her face here towards the end, but Shayna locked in the choke, and Nikki would not tap out. She would not surrender, and so she passed out. Referee called the match off, and so it is a submission win for Shayna Baszler, who retains her NXT Women's Championship. This, to me, was the weakest match on the entire show, my least favorite of all the matches. Still not a bad match, but my least favorite of all the matches on the card. We then had Aleister Black defending the NXT Championship against Lars Sullivan. Lars Sullivan, one of the few true kind of breakout homegrown performers that they have there at the Performance Center. He's not somebody who first made a name for himself on the indies or in another big promotion. They have taken their time with this guy. He's been in that developmental system for, several years now. I mean, I remember first mentioning him on a podcast, I want to say 3 years ago maybe, as a guy to watch out for. He was known for having those kind of big hands, those mutant-like hands. And sure enough, he debuted, and they positioned him as this freak. I mean, his finishing move is called the Freak Accident, for crying out loud. So he's got that whole monster vibe going. They're trying to make him into that. This is not a feud that really has been, doing much for me over the last few weeks. It's just sort of there. It really feels like Aleister Black, in a lot of ways, is getting the Jericho treatment as champion here in NXT. He's taking a backseat to what is a much better feud, what is a much better program, a hot program with Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa. And I have absolutely no issues with the way that they positioned the matches on this card tonight, or last night rather. I think that it was the right match order. I think Gargano and Ciampa should have main evented because that was the true main event of the show. But this is now the, I want to say second time, I believe, that Aleister Black is sort of playing second fiddle to those two guys. But he went in there with Lars Sullivan, and I thought they had a good match. There was that one kind of embarrassing little, I would call it screw up, but there was a little hiccup later in the match where Black went for the Black Mass kick. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be the finish. It may have been the original finish where he would just hit the kick and get the pin. He threw the kick, did not really connect, barely grazed Lars Sullivan. Now, Sullivan had his back turned, so in his defense, he didn't necessarily know how the move looked to the viewing audience. He didn't know exactly how close Aleister Black was to him because he had his back turned. He probably felt something, maybe heard the crowd react and thought, oh shit, he kicked me, I better sell it. He sold it and it looked terrible, and the fans booed. They chanted, you fucked up. But these guys recovered very nicely. They just kept things moving along. He went for another kick. Sullivan caught the leg. In the end, Black had to hit, I believe it was 3 Black Mass kicks, and finally got the pin. So they saved it. I mean, that would have been a horrible way. That would have been awful if that would have been the finish. That they went with that grazed kick, and he sold it anyway, and then you just pin him and get the 3. That would have been terrible. I'll be honest with you. And I've talked about this before. One of the things that really bugs me about WrestleMania 11, which was a terrible show, but they had that Diesel-Shawn Michaels championship match, and Diesel hits the jackknife powerbomb at the end on Shawn Michaels, and it was kind of a botch because Shawn over-rotated, so whoever was responsible, whether it was Shawn, Diesel, whoever, he over-rotated a little bit much on the powerbomb, and he kind of landed almost ass first. The landing did not look very impactful. It's one of those things where you look at it and you say, I hope he kicks out and they redo that. But they didn't. And that was the championship match of WrestleMania, the co-main event at WrestleMania. That always bugged me because that powerbomb just looked terrible. And so it always is kind of annoying when there's a move that's botched, it's supposed to be the finish, or it just doesn't come off looking the way that they want it to look, but got to stick with the finish, and they can't improvise, or they're not allowed to, and they just sort of go with it. They didn't do that here. Maybe it wasn't the planned finish, but aside from that, there really was nothing wrong with the match. It just wasn't as good as the other matches on the card. I mean, for God's sake, you got Ricochet and Velveteen Dream. You have the main event with Gargano and Ciampa. Look at the kind of matches that these two guys are up against. Sullivan is a new guy. He's a young guy. He's learning. He's improving. He's getting better. I didn't go into this expecting a Matt Classic. I did not get one. But I do get the feeling that Aleister Black is just, he's to some extent being marginalized. He's the champion, but he doesn't really feel it, if that makes sense. So he got the win. Like I said, Black Mass kick turned into a good match. And a good showing for Sullivan. It's just unfortunate that they had that one thing that people seem to be focusing on. I guess I'm focusing on it too. But they saved it. I thought they saved it nicely there at the end. And then we had Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano in a Chicago street fight. No rules here in the main event. This is is this the second? I believe the second time now these two have headlined a takeover show. Johnny Gargano is having himself a hell of a year in terms of matches, match quality. He opened the year with, in my opinion, the single best match in NXT history for the championship. It was himself challenging Andrade Cien Almas in January. That was an unbelievable match. He went on to meet Tommaso Ciampa in New Orleans. Ciampa rather, all healed up from his knee injury. They had the big match. It was delayed for a while, kind of like Sting and Flair back in '90. You got to wait for Sting's knee injury to heal up. But eventually they had the big showdown. And they had what some other people said was, in their opinion, the best match in NXT history. And I think in any other year, it would perhaps be the match of the year or the NXT match of the year. I don't think I could put it above the Gargano-Almas match, but it'll be certainly in the running when we talk best matches of the year come December and January, which is always a fun thing to do. But they went out there and had, I guess, 5 stars, right? Certain people give it 5 stars. So Gargano is having himself a hell of a year, and I think, frankly, he notched another one last night. He and Ciampa both. Ciampa, people talk about Johnny Gargano. This guy suffered a catastrophic knee injury, did Tommaso Ciampa. And since he's come back and he's had these couple of matches now with Gargano, yes, Gargano is great. And, he sells well. He's this great baby face to get behind. Plus, he's just a great wrestler. He's just very good at what he does. I don't know that Ciampa gets enough credit either. Ciampa has hung in there with him. Ciampa is also fantastic. And frankly, coming out of this match, I do think that the logical championship match, main event, for TakeOver in Brooklyn in August could very well be Aleister Black defending and losing his championship to Tommaso Ciampa. Surely they could, do the rubber match in the series now that, Gargano has 1 win, Ciampa has 1 win. It's entirely possible and even plausible that, they go to Brooklyn and they have the third and final match between Gargano and Ciampa. I had suggested Hell in a Cell, first ever Hell in a Cell match at NXT, for this match in Chicago. Maybe they do it in Brooklyn. So that's one possibility. But this idea of, kind of maybe stretching this out even more by having Ciampa worm his way into a championship match first and winning the title and then sort of eventually climaxing this feud for the championship is another intriguing storyline possibility. And what a story that would be. Coming off Ciampa's big win last night, if he wins the championship and then Gargano, eventually, I don't know if they can hold off until WrestleMania weekend next year, but if Gargano wins his first NXT title and is able to do it from Tommaso Ciampa. So there's a lot of very intriguing storyline possibilities here, but going back to the match, it's a street fight, so they both come out dressed in street clothes. Candice comes up to her husband backstage before the match and hands him a crutch and tells him to go kick his ass. Great wife. Great wife material right there. So Gargano goes out. Ciampa, of course, has no theme music. Great heel. He just doesn't want to be... He does, every little thing that you would look for in a heel. He just does it so perfectly. And he is treated like a heel. He has no redeeming qualities about himself whatsoever. He doesn't have some cool new t-shirt. He doesn't have any theme music. He doesn't have any special chants. He just comes out and he gets booed. And, people chant, "You suck" at him, and all sorts of things. He's this sort of prototypical, classic, old school heel that we don't really see a whole lot of these days in WWE, right? It seems like that's something that's missing. It feels like that's something that's lacking. He's not cutting promos trying to be cool. He wants people to hate his guts. He is a true villain. And that's what's been so great about him since he came back. So they immediately go at it. Again, there's a lot of back and forth action here in this match. These guys really, they killed each other. These two annihilated each other. With chairs and with leather belt shots. At one point, Ciampa wrapped a chair around Gargano's neck and threw him into the steel steps head first, so the chair would, no pun intended, ricochet back into Johnny's face. It would, jam his throat. We've seen them do that spot with people before, and it puts them out for weeks. Here, it was just a transitional spot, and the match moved on. But there was a lot of crazy stuff in this match, including Tommaso Ciampa ripping up part of the padding in the ring. We've seen this happen a few times before. We all remember the Nexus many years ago when they came and debuted on Raw and they trashed the whole ringside and they were ripping up the things, exposing the plywood. We've since seen that in a couple of matches. I think Undertaker Brock Lesnar did something similar in their Hell in a Cell match 3 years ago. So, Ciampa's ripping up part of it. But again, it's all part of a story here. And that's part of what I loved about this. They would do things like that, and they sort of teased doing a move on it, but then they didn't hit a move on the plywood, and the match sort of just moved on. The action spilled outside. They wrestled up the aisleway. And you almost forget about the fact that, hey, the ring is exposed. I wonder if that's going to come into play. And sure enough, it did, when we get to the finish. But these guys were just brawling all over the place. And, at one point they ended up wrestling through the arena. And they're sort of in the back of the arena. And there's this table. It's got some wires on top of it and like a lamp. Not much else. Just sort of sitting there. Right, this long table. So these two guys crawl up on top of some of those giant equipment carts that they have very strategically positioned. And Tommaso Ciampa, ever the heel, pulls off Johnny Gargano's wedding ring. Which was mistake number one by Gargano. Why even wear your wedding ring to the ring, right? I mean, only bad things can come from that. So Ciampa pulls the ring off, spits on it, and then tosses it aside. And he ends up wasting too much time here. And Gargano picks him up on his shoulders, gives him the Emerald Frozen move off of the equipment cases down through the table, which actually looked pretty brutal. There was no padding or anything under that table. That thing broke on impact, and Ciampa crashed down to the ground. He's lucky he didn't get concussed. Hopefully not. Hopefully he didn't on that spot. But that was pretty cool. So now all the officials rush out there, and they're tending to Tommaso Ciampa. They're putting a neck brace on him. They're loading him up on the backboard. Johnny Gargano is just sitting on top of the equipment case looking down in a scene that was very reminiscent of a year ago when Ciampa turned on Gargano in the first place. You remember, in that very same area over there where the announce table was, on that TakeOver show after they lost, is when the turn happened, and Ciampa gave him, I believe it might have been the same move actually, off the stage through the announce table, and he just sat there. He just sat there like a psycho, staring as people were tending, and all the medical people were tending to Gargano. So I think this was intended, I assume anyway, to be sort of a callback to that. But as they begin to wheel out Ciampa, Gargano's looking at his finger. He sees the wedding ring is missing, and he loses his shit. He says, no, I'm not done with this guy yet. So he goes down, he grabs Ciampa, he rolls him back down to the ring, he hooks him from the gurney, throws him back into the ring, and the match continues. Gargano locks him in the Gargano escape. Ciampa starts feverishly tapping out, but there's no referee. Instead, the security goofballs in black shirts come in, people are booing, they're trying to break this up. There's a match in progress. I'm watching this going, what the hell's going on here? The bell never rang. This match is still going on. This is a no disqualification match. Get these guys out of here. But I don't know where the referee was at this point. But they're pulling Gargano off. And Gargano is like channeling his inner Stone Cold from 1998. He's hitting these guys. He's beating up security guards like he's 10 feet tall. He has the strength of 10 men. And people are eating this up. Every time he punches one of them and knocks one of them down, people are going nuts. And so Gargano pulls out a pair of handcuffs. I believe it was Ciampa who introduced them earlier in the match. He was pulling out all sorts of things from underneath the ring as the night went on. And now it's Gargano who is in possession of the handcuffs. So again, things that were pulled out earlier in the match, or things, little spots that took place earlier in the match. It's almost like a movie where things like that will happen. They'll sort of forget about it, and they want you to forget about it. So when they revisit it later on in the film, it's almost like, I forgot about that. That's the kind of storytelling that we saw here in this match. So they came back to the handcuffs, and it was Gargano using them on Ciampa. He cuffed him. He cuffed his arms behind his back and began to give him a series of at least half a dozen super kicks. This wasn't exactly the brutality of Rock, pasting Mankind in the head with a dozen sick chair shots back in '99 at the Royal Rumble. And there was no blood involved here or anything like that. But still, the man is sitting there completely defenseless. He has his hands cuffed behind him, can't defend himself. And this man is kicking him in the head repeatedly over and over again. It was, as far as modern day WWE goes, it was kind of disturbing. I mean, 20 years ago, we wouldn't bat an eyelash at that, but this was actually kind of disturbing. It's a level of violence in these matches that we're not really used to seeing, I think, from a a WWE main event in 2018. Again, it would have been different many years ago. So he's kicking this guy in the head over and over and over and over again. And again, he puts him in the Gargano escape. No referee. More officials come into the ring, try to break up the submission. And this led to the finish. So Johnny Gargano is taken out of the ring, but he wants back in. He wants back at Tommaso Ciampa. So he makes his way back down to the ring. He jumps up onto the apron. It just so happens to be in the corner of the ring where earlier in the match, Ciampa had ripped off the padding to expose the plywood underneath. And so Gargano gets up on the apron. Ciampa somehow is able to grab, even though his hands are cuffed, he's able to grab him and he gives him a DDT. He DDTs Gargano headfirst down onto the wood. Everybody gasps. And he is commanding the referee to make the count. Referee reluctantly does so. I'm not sure why. It's a street fight. I don't know why the referee would be hesitant in the first place. And he counts the fall, and Tommaso Ciampa pulls one out of his ass in the end, even though Johnny Gargano had him dead to rights. And it's Ciampa getting a big win for a change. Gargano won the first one, Ciampa won this one, and we'll see where they go. You know, perhaps they will have the rubber match at SummerSlam, or again, SummerSlam weekend at the Barclays Center. But I look at this and I say to myself, I kind of like the story of maybe Tommaso Ciampa moving away from Gargano for a little bit so we don't get too tired of this feud. And why not have Ciampa, who in my opinion is the best heel probably in the company right now, challenge Black for the championship at SummerSlam? You can have him win. You can have Johnny Gargano cost him the championship. You know, just like all the crap that, you know, Ciampa has put Gargano and Candice through in this storyline over these last several months. It would kind of make sense if Gargano returned the favor by taking away something very important from Ciampa. They're going to have a series of TV tapings coming up, I think, in the next couple of weeks, and that will paint a picture of where they're going as we head into TakeOver in Brooklyn in November. But I thought that the way this match was executed and the stories they were trying to tell here, and Gargano is snapping, and it's very much unlike him to kind of behave in this way. This wasn't even a match his wife wanted him to take in the first place. We'll see if that factors into things. So I thought this was outstanding. I thought it was an outstanding main event. I thought it was the best thing on the entire show. And for all this talk about star ratings and all that kind of stuff, which is so subjective and so stupid. Although I must say, I do love it when I hear that like Meltzer in his newsletter gave something 7 stars, as ridiculous as that sounds. I love that only because it just seems to really piss people off for some reason and like irritate people and get under their skin. And so I love him for that. I think that's great. But it doesn't matter. You know, you can give it whatever rating you want to. This was an outstanding match. It will go down as one of the best matches all year. And Johnny Gargano right now in this brand, I think, is the MVP of 2018. We're only halfway through the year. But he has had himself a tremendous year up to this point. And we shall see. EC3 was shown in the crowd during this TakeOver special. He did not get involved. I thought he would. He did not get involved in the main event at all. That doesn't mean that we won't get EC3 and Johnny Gargano, or even EC3 and Aleister Black before the summer is over. But they made it a point to show him. They also made it a point to show Keith Lee in the front row on camera. Keith Lee signed with WWE. He's going to be reporting, if he hasn't already done so, to the Performance Center in Orlando. And you know, we'll see when he'll actually make his television debut. I'm not sure when. I'm not sure how quickly. But he's a hell of an athlete. You know, I haven't seen his entire body of work, but I've seen enough of it. A guy his size doing the things he does. I'm sure they have Keith Lee highlight videos on YouTube. Do yourself a favor if you're not familiar with this guy and look him up, because for a guy as big as he is, he does some things in the ring that are just unbelievable. And so they made it a point to show him on camera. I take that to mean we'll see him on TV very soon. That's usually the pattern here. They've shown in the past EC3. They've shown Asuka back when, you know, they put her other name, Kana, on the screen when she first debuted. You know, Bobby Roode. It really wasn't very long after they appeared on these TakeOver shows that they made their debut. So Keith Lee, former WWN champion, on his way into the NXT brand. An NXT brand, by the way, that has already guys like EC3 and Aleister Black and Velveteen Dream and Adam Cole and Ricochet. So they are stocking up on some great talent right now in NXT.